Okay, I think we're live. Thanks for joining us for week 2 of the Omega course. Last week we did Paul Tillich. We looked at his ideas of ultimate concern, his notion of faith as ultimate concern. I think we touched on as well his distinction between a type of demonic or idolatrous faith, where individuals have ultimate concern in something that's finite, something that's not ultimate. And his kind of, in a sense, true type of ultimate concern, where you commit yourself to something fully, but to the element of finitude, the infinite element. I've been actually reading a couple of other books of Tillich's. I would show you if I could find them, but one of them is called Ultimate Concern, and it's a conversation with Tillich and some students. It's a very good book, and in it, he makes a distinction between nationalism, socialism, and humanism on one side, and communism, scientism, and fascism on the other. So, for example, nationalism can be a positive form of ultimate concern. You care about your nation and the values of that nation, democracy, justice, freedom. Fascism is a form of idolatrous ultimate concern. Humanism can be kind of a form of legitimate ultimate concern, but scientism would be its kind of demonic kind of distortion. And socialism can be kind of like a legitimate ultimate concern, but communism, in the sense of like Stalinism, would be seen as a distortion of that. So in that book, Ultimate Concern, he actually uses very, concrete examples of what he's talking about. And ultimate concern can be connected to politics, culture, art, religion. It doesn't just relate to what we understand as religion. So hopefully you got something out of last week. I think we also talked about broken myths and unbroken myths. But this week we're on to Paul Hessert. And Paul Hessert is a personal hero of mine. I know virtually nothing about him. Some of you have done some research and you've realized that he is an international man of mystery, or he was an international man of mystery. Sadly, he is no longer with us. Somebody put up, I don't know who it was, an obituary which said he was killed in a car accident in, I think it was 1997. He was 75 years old. I like this book, Christ in the End of Meaning, so much. Oh, there's Ultimate Concern. That was the book I was talking about. I picked this up because somebody recommended it on my website once. They said, "Oh, your work reminds me a lot of Paul Hessert. Have you been influenced by him?" I'd recommend this book if you haven't. And I just picked it up and read it, and I loved it because I was doing something very similar, and I was learning from the philosophers who were doing something like this in continental philosophy. But this was the first theologian who I encountered who was doing something similar from a theological perspective. So I picked up some of his other books, and they didn't do very much for me. But I realized, I think he wrote a book in 1973, and then he didn't do anything. And then in 1991, or maybe 1993, he wrote this book. Let's see what year it is. 1993, he wrote this book, and then nothing else. So I don't know what happened between 1973 and 1993, which gave him this book. But Christ in the End of Meaning, so I really, really like it. I gave you a chapter that I think captures the heart of the book, gets to the kind of core of what he's trying to do. And I think actually this can connect very closely with what we looked at last week. I think there's a way of seeing that Hessert and Tillich are kind of doing something very similar. There's also a way of reading them that's slightly different. There's some tensions and some differences, but definitely in terms of this course on religionless Christianity, both of them are on the same track, or perhaps you could say in the same field of interest. So this morning, as I was thinking about what to talk about in this lecture, I was making connections in my head with the work of Camus, the French kind of, sometimes some call him an existentialist, some don't, but the French thinker, and also Tertullian, who famously said, although he didn't actually say, it's a paraphrase of something he said, but famously has been reduced to the quote, credo quia absurdum. I believe because it is absurd. So I want to start with that phrase. I believe because it is absurd. And actually, he is talking specifically about the crucifixion of God when he writes this, which is interesting because obviously Hessert is talking about the crucifixion as well. And this phrase has been kind of ridiculed throughout church history and whatever. You know, the idea that you believe something because it's absurd is ridiculous. If I say that my oven is telepathically communicating lottery numbers to me, and then you say to me, that's absurd, and I say, exactly, it's absurd, that's why it must be true, that's why I believe it. Like, that's crazy. It's crazy to say, I know it's mad, but like, I still think it's happening. That's one thing. To actually make an argument where you say, it's because it's absurd, it's true, kind of rings in our ears is absolutely crazy. It doesn't make any sense to us, especially because we are children of the Enlightenment, where we put things in certain buckets. And one of those buckets is things are reasonable or unreasonable. And so, you know, the reasonable is kind of the realm of science, the realm of the academy, the realm of things we can talk about. And all the other stuff is superstition, craziness. You know, it's got no place in public discourse. So Tertullian's phrase, I believe because it's absurd, sounds absurd. But is there a way of making sense of this? And I think in a way to kind of approach it, then we have to move forward to Camus, because Camus bases his philosophical framework on this idea of absurdity. And he defines the absurd in a very precise way. He says that the absurd is the confrontation of a meaning-desiring creature, basically confronting a universe, a world that resists meaning. So when you, as a creature that wants meaning, that wants categories of understanding, confront something that resists meaning or even contradicts meaning or seems meaningless, the experience in us, Camus calls the absurd. So he's kind of talking about an experience, kind of like anxiety or something like that, but he names absurdity as an experience. And you can look at the art of, say, the Dadists, as doing something very similar. Like their art, in one sense, is absurd. It doesn't fit into the kind of history of art. It's often called anti-art. It seems to come up against everything that we would understand as meaning or logic. It confronts us as weird, as bizarre, as strange. And when you're looking at, you know, a piece of Dada art, particularly at the time, in like 1910 or whatever, you would probably experience the feeling of absurdity. You know, what is this? It confronts you, and it kind of like doesn't make any sense within your frame of reference. So Camus is talking about that experience. The absurd is not square triangles or anything like that. It is an experience of a meaningful, desiring mind encountering a lack of meaning. Now, this does not happen in abstraction. You know, when we are confronted with a lack of meaning, it is always connected with something historical, something that happens in a place, in a time, something that we can write down, something we can put in our diary. And it might be the death of someone we love. It might be the loss of our job. It might be an illness. It might be reading a book that critiques everything we used to believe. You may be going to like an evangelical seminary, and then you get a book that suddenly questions some of the stuff that you're reading. And you have this experience where your world begins to crumble. And you don't actually have an alternative belief system. At the moment, it's just a confrontation with something that is disrupting your entire world of meaning. So it happens in history at a point in time. Pascal famously, in his conversion, he writes it down in his diary. Fire, fire, fire. I have met the God, not of the philosophers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he writes this page-long description of this encounter with God. And interestingly to say, it's not the God of the philosophers. For him, that would be Descartes. That's rational reason. This is God of Abraham, who basically tries to sacrifice his son, which is crazy. I mean, this is the thing for anybody who says Christianity or Judaism, whatever, is reasonable and ethical. The whole thing starts off with something that is incredibly unethical and idiotic. No wise person is going to say, go kill your son, and no ethical person is going to say that, right? Kierkegaard calls this the teleological suspension of the ethical. Like, religion starts off in absurdity, right? And Kierkegaard then would hate anybody coming along and say, Jesus was a wise teacher. Oh, Jesus was a moral teacher. He'd be like, what? No. Like, that, and in fact, I think he even said this in one of his polemic essays, like, if there's one thing you can say about Jesus, you can't say anything else. If there's nothing else you can say, the one thing you can say is he was not a wisdom teacher. That's the last thing you can say. And if you want to start to understand that, you can think of the parables. The parables confound wisdom, the wisdom of the day. But technically, it's not just the wisdom of the day. A good parable will always critique the contemporary wisdom, the contemporary view of the world, the contemporary way that we construct meaning, who is inside, who is outside, who is pure, who is impure. At Barry Taylor's church today, they read that blessing that I will post up on the immediate course because I can't remember, but it basically goes, blessed are the queer, the gender queer, blessed are, and it goes through this list of kind of like kinksters and kind of anybody who's kind of like problematizing our views of what's sexually right and sexually wrong, or pure or impure. And it kind of goes along saying, blessed, blessed, blessed. Like a retelling of the Sermon on the Mount. And when I listened to this, it was very powerful, because in some respects, it's just mimicking what Jesus was doing, where he was picking the complete kind of outsiders of his day, the Samaritans, for example, the poor, the slaves, women, those who are completely outside, and they became this privileged space, this privileged place. They critiqued the order of meaning, what we believed was good and bad, what's called the pagan system, really, of like everybody's in their place, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. So that verse from All Things Bright and Beautiful is kind of like the pagan universe. They took that verse out, by the way, because I think they realized that it was a bit wrong. But this system of why things are the way they are, you see Jesus is completely confronting this, disrupting it, So there is this idea of the absurd. The absurd happens in an historical place, an historical time, and it disrupts our systems of meaning. Now this brings us to Hessert's work. This is the original punk, right? This is why Christianity can be seen as the original kind of punk movement, or the original Dadaist movement, or the original discordant movement. Because Paul Hessert is saying that, and this is quite revolutionary. He's saying that we are meaning-desiring beings, and we create societies that have, systems of morality, cultural and political ideas, which of course we need, because we have to survive, we have to live. We'll come back to that in a second, but we create these systems. And there's power in those systems, like the legal power. If you break the law, you're arrested. There's power behind these meaning systems. And traditionally, Christianity, as we know it, either legitimizes those structures. Think of the pastors who bless tanks, or we pray for our president, or the national prayer breakfast or whatever. So religion either solidifies the systems of meaning, or sometimes it provides a countercultural meaning. So it provides an alternative system of meaning, which can be really good, because sometimes that alternative structure critiques the injustice that we see today, but it is still an alternative system of meaning. If that became powerful, like what happened with Christianity originally, if it became the state religion, it would just replicate a new form of meaning. It might be slightly better, who knows, but it's still a new structure of meaning. Or Christianity simply mimics this structure. So you have systems that maybe they're not, either promoting the political system, they're not attacking the political system, but they just have a meaning structure. And actually in the first chapter of this book, Paul Hessert says, whether you're Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, fundamentalist, liberal, progressive, whatever, this structure seems to exist. That Christianity provides meaning and order in the universe. And it gives us a sense of our place in the universe. And that's really good for us in the sense of we hate a lack of knowing. Slavoj Žižek gave a very good lecture that I recommend, which is called something like why only an atheist can be a Christian, or something, which he gave in Calvin College, I think it was Calvin College, to a packed audience. And it's a very, very good lecture. But at one point he talks about how having a meaning, even if it's a horrible meaning, is often better for us than having no meaning at all. Like if you break up with someone, you might keep asking them why. Why did you do it? Why did you do it? Why did you do it? And you'd almost prefer them to say, I don't fancy anymore. I find someone better. That's better than the not knowing. That's better. I actually, funnily enough, I've written this film script, and in it there's a play, and the play is based on this guy who's arrested in the 1800s, and he's put in the cell beside Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky is then let out of his cell. They put him in front of the firing squad. They pull the trigger, but of course, as historically, if you know your kind of Russian history, you'll know that it was a mock execution. Actually, a pardon from the Tsar was read out. Dostoevsky was allowed to go free. And so this little play in the film is about the other guy. At first, he's elated because he thinks, well, maybe I won't get shot. Dostoevsky survived. Maybe I'll survive. Maybe they won't kill me. But over the course of months, this elation becomes more and more problematic. He gets more and more anxious. Will I live or will I die? And the anxiety is worse than the peace he had knowing he was going to die. So eventually he hangs himself. Right? So the idea is that sometimes the anxiety of not knowing something is worse for us than having an explanation, even if it's an explanation that means that we are sinful or we're bad or whatever. So we are these meaning-creating beings. And why was I saying that? Where was I? You have to remind me where I was.
Only atheists can be Christians lecture.
Oh, yeah, that. What was
Christianity provides meaning and order of the universe. Atheists because we hate not knowing.
Yes, I can pick up from there. Very good. Jennifer's listening. Gold star for her. She's going to get the hymn book at the end of these 4 weeks. I'm putting 2 stars on her hymn book. So yeah, Christianity is meaning thing. Oh yes, so I listed the 3 things. Either it's secures the status quo, critiques it, or does something alternative. But it doesn't encounter. We don't encounter the absurd. But Paul Hessert puts a very crazy alternative proposition. He says that the term Christ crucified is the ultimate absurdity. Christ crucified, it's hard for us to hear the craziness of that. It's hard for us to hear it because we've heard it so many times, and it's being put into a system of meaning. But for the original hearers, this is God killed. This is the creator of the universe dying helplessly on a cross. This counteracts everything you would think about wisdom, everything you would think about as a sign that God is with us. The cross meant you were cursed of God. The cross meant you were no longer a citizen. The cross meant you were subtracted from the cultural world in which you were inhabited. You were the nobody, the nothing. You were the trash of the world. Now, interestingly, then trash in Christianity becomes a good thing. Christians are called the trash of the world, right? But when you think about this is like turning everything on its head. The one thing you can't do is you can't put this into an LA positive thinking message, right? It just doesn't work. You can't build a positive meaning out of it. Now you can, which is the history of atonement theories. We'll come to that in a second. But Hessert is saying, okay, the original punk move is Christ crucified. It's absurd because all of our desire for meaning is confronted by this thing that doesn't seem to make any sense at all. It ruptures not just simply kind of like the one historical idea of what's good and what's bad. It kind of goes deeper than that. It kind of critiques the very foundation of what is good and what is bad. It ruptures this whole thing. And he makes a point of saying it's not Jesus crucified, because Jesus crucified would make some sense. He says, the Stoics could claim that, say Jesus was a good person who was killed because of a terrible world, and he showed forgiveness and he showed a Stoic attitude. So that makes sense. It's a tragedy, but it makes sense. But the idea of Christ crucified, God crucified, just offends us, offends reason. And I think that this can be seen throughout the Bible. And the parable is just another example, a less extreme example, that we want meaning, and then Jesus tells a parable. And then we want the parable explained, and then Jesus tells a more bizarre parable, right? So this is like, it's if you're in theory and you've read Lacan, this isn't really kind of what he's doing in some ways. He once famously said, I don't write books in order to be understood. I write books in order to be read. Right? And if you've ever read him, you realize how frustrating it is reading him. Sometimes it's absurd. Sometimes it's like so messes with your head, but it also does something to you. It also brings you somewhere. So this is what Hessert is saying is going on in the Gospels. And he says, if you're looking for other examples, he says this is potentially could be happening anywhere, lots of different religions. But he says, within Jewish thought, Shoah, or the Holocaust, is potentially a similar experience in that Jewish thinkers talk about how the Holocaust basically is an affront to theodicy. It cannot be given an explanation. Silence is the only response. There's something inherently offensive about trying to give a meaning to this event. It's a projectile that breaks into our world. And this is why, by the way, John Caputo has a beautiful line where he says, religion is not projection. Religion is a projectile. And what he means by that is religion is projection. He's referring to Feuerbach. Feuerbach is a brilliant thinker. We did him for Atheism for Lent. Who says that a lot of what you see as religion is a projection of our own beliefs, our ideas, our longings. Religion reflects kind of ultimately our systems of meaning. You want to know what humanity's like, look at their gods. Just like you want to look at, you want to know what someone's like, look at their dog. You can tell whether they've got a big butch dog or a little tiny puppy or whatever. You can tell the personality of their owner from their dog. In a sense, you can tell the personality of the person from their god. It'll tell you a lot sometimes about what they desire, they fear, what they think of themselves, etc. And then when Caputo says, well, religion at its most subversive is a projectile, what he means is that there is this radical punk subversive core to Christianity that smashes our projections, that like an arrow goes right into them and disrupts everything that we think, says no to all of our yeses, gets us to go, oh my goodness, I never thought like that before, right? And again, as I say, think of the prophets, think of the parables, think of Christ crucified. These are constantly things that confront us with the rupture of meaning in our lives. And for Hessert, there's two dimensions to this. He says there's the objective and the subjective. And if I get this right, there's the objective side, as in there are things in our lives that confront us with this lack of meaning. So that's objective in the sense it happens in history, in a time and in a place. But we often try to avoid that. We avoid confronting that. So we run away from it. But the subjective side is whenever we actually embrace that, we let that speak, we let that disrupt us, we let that damage us, break us open to new possibilities. In philosophy, this is called the event. An event is something that happens that you cannot program, that you can't kind of predict, that after it's happened, you can kind of predict, you can kind of then work back and do causality and go, oh, you know, like Kafka, oh yeah, you can see who Kafka might have been influenced by. But at the time when Kafka writes, you're like, whoa, this has just never been seen before. You know, it's like it just enters the world as something you couldn't predict. That's like an event. So the subjective side is welcoming this event, the objective and the subjective. And what Hessert is saying is the word belief is not appropriate to this, because belief relates to what we can talk about sensibly, what we can see and what we can understand. And of course, I haven't mentioned, by the way, that all of this rests on Paul's distinction between those who seek signs and those who seek wisdom. You know, the Jews, they want signs, the Greeks want wisdom. And for Paul, kind of like, those were the two ways that you could solidify your position in life. Either there are signs and wonders that say God is for you, your football team wins, Northern Ireland beat Ukraine 2-0 last week in the Euros, which is pretty impressive. You know, so God is on our side, right? You know, or your child is rescued. I actually know somebody whose child was kidnapped, and he has this incredible story of how the child 24 hours later was found. Can't remember where he was, but and he talked about it as a miracle. But then he told me that 4 other kids were kidnapped at the same time, and none of them survived. And so there was this weird experience I had when I was listening to the story and hearing him say how, you know, and I can understand as a father how he felt like this. This is not a criticism of him. He felt God was for him and with him and saved his child. But then after he said that, and after he told me the whole story, just the little addition was, and the crazy thing was, that 4 other kids were kidnapped as well, and none of them survived. And I'm like, you know, could you tell me the story? Could you tell them the story that you told me? You know, could you say that, you know, God is on your side, and obviously then maybe not on their side. But signs are a way of saying God supports our country. We won that war. We won that battle. God saved my child. And also wisdom is a way of like using apologetics, knowledge, words, ideas to solidify your position. You know, a lot of apologetics is giving you reams of information to say you're justified in thinking that you're right. Okay. So Paul has these, and then he says, oh, the crucifixion, Christ crucified. No, that's ridiculous for wisdom, and it's a stumbling block for signs. Because as a sign, it's not a sign that God's with you. It's a sign that God died. You know, it's a sign that everything that you think is normal is not. And as wisdom, it's not a sign that the Messiah is, again, some strong force who's with you. It's like it's foolishness. It doesn't make any sense. So it critiques those two things and confronts you with this absurdity. Now I'm going to do the same thing as before and go, where was I? Just before I said that.
An event.
Objective versus subjective.
Yes, and faith. Oh yeah, faith. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well done. So what has it got to do with this? So belief is connected. We'll all get through this together, I promise. Belief is connected to signs and wisdom, and that's, you can believe something because it's sensible. But Paul uses the word faith because in a sense you can't believe in this absurdity. It's kind of like it's what offends belief. So, you know, Hessert's kind of retelling of this phrase by Tertullian, or it's a paraphrase of him, is like, I have faith in the absurd, not I believe in the absurd, I have faith in the absurd. Which is a way of saying that things enter into the world that rupture the way I think about life and the way I think about existence. And I give myself to that. I cultivate a sensitivity to the absurd, which is a way of saying I cultivate a sensitivity to that which challenges my worldview, my thinking about politics, my thinking about cultural ideas, my thinking about religion. And that in concrete terms, because let's not get too abstract, in concrete terms, that means I orient myself to the other. Who or what in the world is challenging me and saying that my world is wrong? And that's why, and I think I said this last week, and I've repeated it in various ways in the past, but it's why I'm against the idea of social justice being good news. We are good news to the poor. We go and we help the homeless because they're homeless. We go and we help those in prison because they are suffering because of crimes they've committed. We want to be generous to them. And I want to instead say that they are good news to us. That the outsider, the prisoners tell us that we live in, say, a racist society, a society of deep economic and educational difference. We live in a culture that would rather imprison someone than educate them or give them a job or whatever. That actually the prison system tells us there's something wrong in our system of meaning and how we do the world. And so we go to the prisoner, not to be good news to them, but because they are a prophet to us. They, if we listen, can tell us something about something that's wrong within our world, in our culture, in our social body, that requires salvation and change. The same with the homeless population. You go there and you realize that, oh, we can't deal with mental health issues, or we put young men in wars that traumatize them, or, whatever it is. You listen and you go, oh my goodness, that ruptures my whole way of thinking about the world. When your children go to university and they come back with some crazy ideas about sexuality or politics, and they're sitting around the dinner table, and you're talking, and then they bring something up, that is disruption. And what can happen is the parents can either go, we're shutting this down. You know how you were brought up, the values of this family. You go to those crazy liberal universities, get those crazy liberal ideas and bring them back. No, not around the dinner table, right? Or the parents go, whoa, this is shocking to me. I've never thought like this, but let's talk about it. Tell me more. What's this? And the parents then, not in a patronizing way, because patronizing would be there, you talk about your little ideas, but actually go, oh my goodness, we have fed you for 18 years in terms of our ideas and our culture. We've given you as much as we can. Now it's your turn to give to us. Now it's your turn to disrupt what we've given you, and something new might arise. So there's this really interesting place. And if we want to connect that to what Tillich was saying last week, not Tillich was saying last week, he died a number of years ago. But he talked about broken myths and unbroken myths. That's kind of a point maybe when some parents might be like, okay, you're about to break our narrative. And either we're terrified of that, so we're not going to let it happen, or brilliant. Either I'm a bit terrified, but do it. Or some parents might go, this is kind of exciting. I'm not dead yet. I'm not done. I can learn new things and become a new being again. So this is what Paul Hessert, I think, is saying, or this is the practical implications of what Paul Hessert's saying, which of course has practical implications for us today when we think about who is the outsider in our society, who is the other. And of course, we have to think about Muslims. We have to think about homophobia, gay, lesbians. We have to think about transgender. We have to think about, but I don't want to say that one group necessarily holds the position of the outsider. There's sadly so many outsiders and so many voices that can cause us discordance and rupture us, fragment us. And so cultivating this sensitivity to that is good news for us, and hopefully transformative for other people as well. For example, as we deal with racism or educational issues or wealth disparity, we don't have to think about, well, how are we going to close down prisons? They're going to start closing down themselves. Now, that sounds a bit idealistic, but I think it's kind of true. Maybe they're not all going to close, but if you genuinely in a state, for example, deal effectively with those issues, then of course it's going to have real impact on the prison population. They are not the problem, they're the solution to a problem in society, a solution we've come up with so as not to look at something disruptive, so as not to allow our systems of meaning to rupture. Because we don't want that at all. That's terrifying to us, so we create solutions that prevent us from having to do that. But that causes problems, and if we listen to the other, then that disrupts us. Christ crucified then is the ultimate Dadaist movement, it's the ultimate punk saying. And if we're part of the Christian tradition, I believe part of our vocation, part of my vocation, is helping to, rediscover that in our communities and in ourselves, helping us experience the true offense, the utterly offensive, absurdist, ridiculous message that is contained there, because it can potentially be life-giving. So I'll say one more thing and then we'll go to some questions here and any questions that people have here in the room. What do I want to end on then? Oh yeah. What happens when you cultivate this is you still have to have systems of meaning, worlds. You have to. John Caputo talks about it in terms of the possible and the impossible. The possible is the world that you know, the world that makes sense, the world that allows you to make 100 different small ethical decisions every day, that helps you decide, what you're going to do with your life. That's the possible. And the possible is also the future that you can predict, the future that you know is going to happen, what you want to do. I want to settle down. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to travel. The impossible, Caputo describes using Derrida, is what you cannot imagine. It's what breaks into your world of possibility and disrupts it all and goes, oh my goodness, that I didn't expect that. And it could be somebody new comes into your life, or you suddenly get caught up in a cause that you didn't care about in the past, or someone dies, or you find out you're pregnant, or you find out that you have a relative who's worth tens of millions and they left you all this money, but first you have to go to Outer Mongolia and find goblets before you can have it. I don't know. It's impossible. You can't say what it is, but there's things that happen in your life that you can't predict. Now, the idea is you can't live in the impossible. You just can't do it. That's the more you try to do that, you'll live a chaotic, crazy life and probably die, on the side of the street somewhere. But you also will die in your soul if you live fully in the realm of the possible and the life of meaning and all of that. Somehow this means accepting and loving the tradition that you're in. There's whatever tradition you're in, there will be beautiful things. Traditions last because they're usually useful. Often they produce good things. Every church that I know, every denomination started because they were fighting some oppression. For Methodist, Presbyterian, whatever it is, start off because they're trying to do something good. So you're probably part of a tradition that has incredible wealth in it. And it's not about throwing all of that away, but somehow it's about saying, I want to cultivate an ear, an intentionality, a sensitivity to what will rupture that, to who in space and time, and to what in my history and my world will break it open, will expose oppressions within my system that I'm not aware of, that will call it to greater health and greater transformation. So it's that kind of experience of living in the possible with an ear to the impossible, living in what is with a sensitivity to the event. Loving your tradition and not to betray it. That's why my book, The Fidelity of Betrayal, the one book that nobody reads, which actually, and because it's got the worst cover you've ever seen in the world. It's a really terrible cover. There's a story behind that. I don't know if I can tell it. I probably can't. No, I can't. No, I can. Basically, there was this. Yeah, I can't find it. Well, I had a really good cover design for it with my friend did Caravaggio and stuff like that. But then the publishers said, oh, well, there's this nun who's I think it was 80 or something like that, did this painting, which I think is a very nice painting. So, but she said, that should be the front cover. And I was like, well, that's a really nice story. Okay. But it really doesn't work as a cover. I'm sorry. And if you're listening, the nun, it's very good, but I don't think it's the right cover because it's yellow. I am not a yellow guy. I've never worn a colour in my life before, let alone yellow. I'm even colourblind, so colours are not my thing. So anyway, but some of the people who like my work said the best book I wrote. But it's called A Fidelity Betrayal because it's saying you want to love your tradition and be faithful to your tradition. But to be faithful to your tradition means as well to betray it. To betray it whenever it does damage and harm to other people. You let other people be discordant phenomenon, explosions in your world that open you up to new possibilities. And then you kind of create a world, a community that is open to the other, that doesn't create solidified meaning structures, that tries to then take responsibility for one's actions. This is a consequence. If you have some meaning structure, you don't have to take responsibility for your actions. The structure does. I'm doing this because that's what my ancestors did. I'm doing this because that's what the book says. I'm doing this because that's the right thing to do. Whenever the meaning structure ruptures, you still do stuff. But here's a terrifying thing. You have to say, I'm doing it and I take responsibility for it. And if it screws up, I'm going to have to take responsibility for that. So it's a community that takes responsibility for their actions and acts, ultimate concern, so you have to act, but you also have to take responsibility for your act and are open to the ongoing critique of your systems through the other who you encounter as the absurd. That, I think, is what Hessert's doing. Okay, now let's look at some questions. Okay, so question about science. I'm not sure if I understand it correctly. I see something of what is being said, but what, it disappeared. But what of the resurrection, is that not a sign? Okay, yeah, I knew this would happen, because of course that's the question you have to ask. It's a good question. You can't go like, we've just done Christ crucified. Well, there's another big part of the story. There's one you're not mentioning, and it's the resurrection. And we're going to do the resurrection, I think, hopefully in the last week. So we'll talk more about that. The one thing I'll say, and you don't have to agree with this or not, because I'm not giving enough data for you to agree or disagree, but someone like Hessert wants to argue that the resurrection is not the undoing of the crucifixion. It is not the, whoa, it looked really terrifying and awful, but it's like being in a roller coaster, but actually, you're totally safe, it's totally fine. The resurrection for Hessert is, in a sense, it's kind of, I suppose, the subjective side. I don't know if he'd say this, but I'm trying to put it into his words. The subjective side of the objective faith. The crucifixion is the embrace of the absurd, and the resurrection is the bringing that into yourself. And the reason why he reads it that way is because resurrection God, post-resurrection God, is a little bit different from pre-resurrection God in some ways. Pre-resurrection God is a being who you relate to. Post-resurrection God is where two or three are gathered together, there I am. And of course this is in the Gospels because they were written after the resurrection. So it's in there, but it really becomes explicit. The idea where the hungry are fed, where the thirsty are given water, where the naked are clothed, where the prisoners are visited, where justice is done, where righteousness flows, there I am. The resurrection then becomes this way of saying, God is not that which justifies your world of meaning. God is found in the act of loving, the act of engaging with the world in love. That's what Bonhoeffer is doing when he says religion is Christianity. He says, God is not an object that justifies your meaning systems. Forget about that. Give yourself take full responsibility for your life. Engage and try and do good in the world. And God is found in that. That's what Hessert would say. So he'd say resurrection is not the sense of, okay, it's all okay in the end. It's a redoubling of the crucifixion. It's part of the crucifixion. It's the affirmative side of the crucifixion. It's God no longer as the guarantor of meaning. In philosophy, it's called God as the guarantor of meaning. It's what Heidegger attacked. So God is no longer the guarantor. God is now the fellow traveler, the friend, the name you give to that which you encounter in the act of love itself. Would you say that using faithing instead of believing reframes our faith or belief system to be more open-hearted, inclusive, and compassionate? Yes. In that, so faith and this is different. This is where there's a difference between Tillich and Hessert. Because for Tillich, faith is ultimate concern. For Hessert, faith is a commitment to the absurd. But for Hessert, when you commit to that, you're more open to the other and to difference, and because when faith is belief, or then even if I respect you, I think you're wrong, and more likely than not, I'm trying to convince you to be me, etc., etc. But in this idea of faith, we're all wrong, and I think therefore faith is much less dogmatic. You enter into Tillich's idea of faith as symbols. The words we use are symbols. So it's not like you go, blue is better than green. They're like, that these are symbols that help you or don't help you engage with the transcendent. I think you're probably right, but I'd probably have to think more about how all of that connects. But if just bear in mind, Tillich, faith is ultimate concern, which means for Tillich, faith can be good and bad, good or bad. So I say Hitler and fascism is faith, but it's bad faith. For Hessert, it doesn't quite work quite like that. For Hessert, faith is the commitment to, that which disrupts our meaning systems. And then as John Caputo would say, that doesn't always work out for the good. Don't think that because you do that, it's going to work. If you go into a new relationship and you give yourself to that, it could be a disaster. It could be a disaster, and you have to take kind of responsibility for that in a sense. For making that decision, for going into it, you are condemned to responsibility. In a paraphrase of Sartre, you're condemned to being responsible in this worldview, because when your world opens up in new ways, it can be awful, but it can be wonderful, and it's probably better than the alternative, which is basically living death. Rest in peace is what happens when you die. Rest in peace means I don't let anything outside get into my circle of reality. It's closed off. And that's more deadly than going, I'm going to take a risk in life. Anybody want to ask a question here in the room?
So based on what you were just saying, would Hessert say, is he saying to push past a logical fallacy of the argument from absurdity, or do you see that his pursuit of this as fallacious from a logical standpoint? And if you do, why this one?
Yeah. So if I hear you right, are you saying because what Tillich's doing as well, and Hessert, they're both trying to say that this is not irrational. So they're not saying this is a logical fallacy. They're not saying it's like square circles, or say it said today in church, can God make a burrito so hot that God can't eat it? Right? It's kind of a strange logical problem. They both want to say this is neither rational nor irrational. The absurd, in fact, if anything, the absurd includes reason in it. So, but is that what you're asking? Or are you telling me is the absurd irrational?
So at one point in time, I think you mentioned Tertullian would say that suggests that you should believe this because it's absurd.
Oh yeah,
that sounds like a fallacy to
yes.
me.
Yes. Yeah, and I think he was. By the way, I this morning I remembered that, and I was thinking, this is really interesting. I don't think I'm doing what he's saying, but suddenly I realized that it does fit with Kierkegaard, and it does fit with Hessert and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and that's why I changed the word from believe. I believe because it's absurd, because Hessert doesn't want to say that. He always says, I have faith because it's absurd. So because belief is on the level of rationality and logic. And that's why it doesn't work. Yes, I believe because it's absurd is a problem for Hessert. Okay. And it would be a problem for Tillich. Tillich's an incredibly rational guy, building planes, cooking meals, building computers, doing so many things. Reason is so deeply important, it's included. Faith in the absurd is simply a sensitivity to the rupture of meaning systems. That's kind of it. I think it was Laplace, who was a philosopher, who said, if you knew the exact position of every atom at the beginning of the universe, whatever, you knew all the data at the very beginning, you could literally predict everything. If you had an all-powerful mind. So everything is predictable. What Hessert's saying with some continental philosophers like Deleuze and others is actually there's something unprogrammable about the universe. And interestingly, not to use quantum mechanics as a way of doing this, because I know nothing about quantum mechanics, and anybody who starts to go in quantum mechanics, right? But I do know a little bit about quantum mechanics, like wave dual polarity and superposition. Basically, that the idea as well, and the subatomic particle, you can't know the velocity and the direction at the same time. The more you know one, the less you know the other. There seems to be an indeterminacy in the basic structure of reality itself. That's just what kind of is being explored at the moment. But that is a very good analogy of what these people are saying, is that the absurd is not saying that, like the same way as physicists aren't being irrational, they're being incredibly mathematical about this. But there's something that the mathematics can't grasp. There's something, and it's not because of a lack of knowledge. That was the original Newtonian idea of the unknown. There's the known here, and the unknown is here. And everything in principle here can be understood. The only thing you can't grasp is what started it all. In in contemporary, post-Einstein quantum mechanics, you have the idea that the unknown is in the known. Not because of a lack of information, but precisely because there is an inherent antagonism in existence itself. So Hessert's saying it's not irrational, it's not anti-rational, it's not logical fallacy. It is simply there is an antagonism in existence that opens up new possibilities. And if we close ourselves off to that, we're closing ourselves off to the truth of the scandal of Christianity. I still don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm sorry.
That's helpful.
But we can go back and forth.
I guess I don't understand why Christianity, as opposed to any other mystical belief.
Yeah, and Hessert, he says that in this thing. He says, like, this can happen. This may or may not happen. Like, the may or may not's important because he doesn't want to do the typical liberal move, which is we're all the same. There's a weird thing of saying, like, oh, you can find this everywhere. Go like, no, you might find something even better in Buddhism or whatever. But when you say everything's pretty much the same, what you're not getting, he would say, or Kakuta would say, you're not getting that unique languages and unique traditions create unique insights and whatever. And so to kind of reduce it all to we're all in the same boat. But he also doesn't want to say it's unique. Like, so there's one line where he says, this could happen elsewhere. He says, I've got my Christian narrative and tradition, and I said, and our key term is Christ crucified. And he also says, he says, like, maybe in Jewish thought, the Holocaust does something similar, but I'm sure even then he doesn't want to say the same. And he probably would say, listen, I just don't know Hinduism well enough or whatever, but there could be a move. In fact, he's almost saying, or he is saying that in the same way that I said that it's not that for Camus the universe resists meaning. It always happens historically in a place and in a time. It always happens somewhere. In Christianity, we make the claim that in Jesus, until it's very clear to say, we don't even know if that's an historical figure, who it was, or whether he was cut, we don't know. But in history, in a point and in time, something happened for him that kind of like, articulates this. I think Hessert wants to say the same, but yes, he doesn't want to be exclusive. He doesn't want to kind of go. He might even go as far, by the way, as saying, like, Zizek does this as a radical atheist. He thinks that Christianity is the place where this idea enters history. In the same way that you could say Marxism is the point when Marxist ideas, you call them Marxist ideas now, but entered history. They're probably elsewhere, but that, when he wrote this Capital, that's crystallized it. But that for someone like Zizek or Hessert is really an intellectual. That's an academic claim that may or may not be true. And I think, as time goes on, people will be less and less convinced by that kind of argument. So the short answer is yes. I think Hessert wants to say that's our name for it. And I don't think he wants to say more. I think he wants to say, and it's a bloody good name for it. Like, he was like, Christ crucified is genius. Is genius. It's like, in fact, I was almost thinking I should get a tattoo of like, I have faith in the absurd or something, because it's incredibly, it's incredible But he doesn't want to necessarily say it's the only place that something similar is going on.
Thank you.
I'll just have a quick look. Do you have anything to say about the concept of what we might call resonance? Sense of something we encounter having a deep sense of inner truth, connection, revelation, familiarity, and the idea that this is the kind of compelling sign we're searching for. Oh yeah, so like in love or something like that, where you feel I was dead and now I'm alive, or an insight where something makes no sense, and then you feel you've made sense of something. Lonergan calls it an insight. Yeah, how does that fit in with this? Is that yeah? I don't know. This is where Tillich and Hessert are slightly different, because Tillich wants to ultimately say something similar to Hessert, but then Tillich undergirds all of this with a oneness. So basically Tillich says, yes, relativism, perspectivalism, he embraces all of that, except where he says there are absolutes. Which is great book. Can you pass me that? My search for absolutes.
Oh, yeah.
This, by the way, is a beautiful little book I got on Amazon, and it's beautiful because it's Tillich with 3 autobiographical essays, and then it's got these incredibly crazy and surreal and brilliant sketches based on Tillich's ideas from, I think it's a famous illustrator. I didn't know who he was, but he's called Saul Steinberg. I think he did like maybe New York Times stuff. It's a really cool book. And in this, My Search for Absolutes, he says, yeah, like, don't ever think that your morality is right. Your morality is always, in postmodern terms, deconstructible. Tillich calls it the Protestant principle, always reforming. You're never reformed. So the Protestant principle. But he says, but the very desire to be ethical is absolute. And the desire to not treat people as objects. These are the kind of absolutes. So you always have to decide relativistically what the right move is, but there's an absolute that you kind of connect to. So Tillich is really into that. Hessert, from that chapter, less so. He wants to have more chaos, and I probably a little bit like that. But Tillich probably has this idea that what you're experiencing in that is the truth of the ground of being. And he wants you to make a distinction between the relativistic worldviews that we have and this deeper sense of love, commitment to the other, commitment to the transcendent, where we feel that resonance. So I don't know, but yeah, Tillich, you like Tillich for that stuff. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. We've been here for an hour. I'm fine through the questions. Do we need any theologians after Kierkegaard? I like that. That's quite provocative. I don't even know what it means quite, except I think it is. I mean, Kierkegaard is the ultimate critique of theology. The one thing Caputo says about Kierkegaard, which I think is very good, is you can't build anything on Kierkegaard. Not even anything deconstructive or anything like molten. Kierkegaard's like, yeah. The problem is you can't really do very much after Kierkegaard. He was so iconoclastic. It's incredible to read. So if you like Kierkegaard, you'll end up probably alone and like Kierkegaard dying very, very young. But that might be the right thing. I'm not saying that's wrong, but Kierkegaard was a messed up kid. I'm incredibly brilliant. So yeah, no, I think you can't do theology after Kierkegaard without either reading Kierkegaard or getting his central insight. So like Karl Barth, he was very Kierkegaardian in his early book, his Epistle to the Romans. It blew everything apart. I mean, I don't think theology is any good if it hasn't wrestled with these kind of ideas and with people like Kierkegaard. So yeah, and in a sense, I would agree with you there. You can't do theology the same way after Kierkegaard, just as you can't do philosophy or theology the same way after Freud, Nietzsche, Marx, Feuerbach. I mean, for me, they're all not required reading, like you have to sit down and read them, but like read their Wikipedia page,
There's one that I'd love for you to answer.
Oh yeah.
Go up a little bit. Keep going.
Keep going. Keep going.
Oh yeah, keep going. Did it disappear? Shoot.
We're looking for a question. By the way.
It's 2 up. It's this Casey Mack one.
Oh, Casey Mack.
One up from
there. One up. Oh, Casey Mack. I know Casey.
Yeah.
Okay, read the other. Listening to those telling you you're wrong, the good news from the prisoner. What about the other way around? The people I find hard that I want to shove away that tell me I'm wrong are more traditional conservative. Parents in your example of the kid going to liberal college. So does this work only on a societal level or personally?
And then this is like for the clear.
Oh yeah, is a racist or homophobe is an outsider in San Francisco. Yeah, this is key because you think about it in terms of what's happening in America at the moment. And this is very contemporary, so it's probably very contentious. But like you look at the big support for Trump, and you look at what's happening. So do you go, okay, I'm going to listen to Trump? Going to listen, oh yeah, maybe we should build a wall. Yeah, maybe Muslims are a bit dodgy, right? No, that's kind of not what this is about. But it is listening. It's listening not to what is, and this is where psychoanalysis comes in. Psychoanalysts don't rarely listen to what you say, because what you say is generally a lie that you tell yourself to protect yourself from what you really believe. So when you go into the therapeutic room, you're talking away, especially if you're neurotic. You'll be like, wow, lots of things and everything, and this person said this, and you'll tell them the whole day. Right? I'm completely different. I'm like completely silent. When I did psychoanalysis, I could do an hour where I didn't say anything, right? But you say lots and lots of things. Now, the analyst is waiting for the slip. They're waiting for the moment when you say the wrong name, when you hesitate, when it looks like you dodged something, when two words slip into one word. Because for them, it's not what's said that's the truth, it's what's unsaid that comes out in the symptom, in the slip, the Freudian slip, because that leads to something else. In the same way, you're listening to the symptom. You're listening to, so you're asking yourself, why is this happening? That's a very important question, and there's a load of people trying to answer it. But what more so you're listening, but not listening to the content, which is generally, I think we could say, is generally a lie. The slips are the truth whenever maybe Trump is up against the wall and he says something where he uses a phrase like, I actually don't follow all this stuff. So, but I'm sure I know he said really inappropriate things at times, right? So those are kind of slips. But probably he has his thing that he's supposed to say, whatever. And the little slip comes out where he says something nasty, right? And that's the truth. That's the signal to something else, right? So you listen to that, but you listen to why this is popular. And this is the unpopular bit I'm going to say, is this could be a response to a form of liberalism that is repressing stuff. Because Freud talks about the return of the repressed. When you repress, it always returns. And so if you repress your violence and your aggression and certain things, they don't go away. You just go there inappropriate and you hide them. And then they come out another way. So there's probably lots of people voting for Trump who would never admit they're voting for Trump or something like that. But sometimes it might be because there's some issue within our society that, so instead of they're the other, Trump is the other, the weird, the cancer that we can cut out of our body and we'd be better. The more terrifying idea is there something about what's going on that tells us about ourselves? Not that we are racist and we are this or that necessarily, although it might be that, but it's saying something. And we have to sit with it and go, okay, what is it about? And it's not, you as a social body. So you're asking this for an individual as well, but it's the same thing. It's like if fundamentalism is huge in your town, you live in a town where fundamentalism is huge, you have to listen to why. Because it's not very helpful for people, It's like, why would fundamentalism be useful? Well, is it because people are poor and people have crap jobs, they have no job security or no education or something like that? This provides, covers over anxiety, covers over fear. You're always, it's a slight distrust in the same way that the analyst has to have a slight distrust of what you say, so as to get to the heart of what it means. So that's what I mean by listening, that often it's just really trying to ask ourselves, if this is in my family or if this is in my society, is there something that's happening that's a result of it? And by the way, sometimes people are psychotic and they are completely detached. And it's nothing to do with you. You've got your crazy auntie who likes to torch cats And you're asking yourself, why does crazy Auntie May like to kill cats? And actually it's because she's doolally, which is a technical term. Something terrible happens. But sadly, more often than not, we are family systems, we are societal symptoms, and more often than not, problems within families and problems within societies do connect and interrelate in complex ways. That helped at all. Any other questions or thoughts here?
Can I take one quick one?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's not quick. So this sounds, if I understand Hessert correctly, Christ the end of meaning, similar to what Caputo calls his nihilism of grace and hoping against hope, which is a very beautiful notion, I think. But I think there's a fine line between nihilism of grace and just complete utter despair.
Yeah.
Right? What do you think is that line? And do you see any danger ever in getting really close to that?
Yeah.
Right? Because I've seen some people go down this road, and even personally, you question all these things, and you get to this place of, where the whole thing can become very dangerous, I think, to some extent. So what is that line, and how do you avoid that?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I know somebody, a friend of mine, it's a crazy story, very sad story, but ultimately it ended in suicide. Now, there were a number of elements to his story, a number of things that happened, but one of them was he was a very conservative Christian. We actually did schools work together within the schools and basically did evangelism together. But I started to change, and he stayed within it. And at one point he said to me, Pete, he made a very telling comment. He said, I can't question the way you're questioning. He used the word can't. Can't remember what it was. I think I can't go there. And I was interested. I said, why did you say use the word can't and not like, it doesn't make sense to me or I disagree? And he then went, listen, I suppose I feel that if I pick that thread, everything will fall to pieces and I won't have anywhere to stand. Now, fast forward 10 years, he disappeared for a number of years. I thought he had died. He showed up miraculously. I bumped into him in a tiny town called St. Stephen's in Canada. And he's completely changed his life, but he's gone through this completely deconstructive process, but he goes through then a couple of other tragedies, and it ends in suicide. Now, part of it was the unpicking of everything. And part of it, sadly, was him leaving and not being welcome and feeling welcome in his community. So being isolated. And then he was very badly injured and was in a wheelchair for a long time. And a lot of things happened. And I can't say that wasn't one of the things. I can't say it was the only thing, but it was. And that's why I talk about having to do this in community. It's so important to me to do this in community, not to be isolated. The very point when you start to deconstruct, you can become isolated, and that's dangerous. So that's it. It is dangerous. I can say, mind you, that the majority of times I see this as profoundly liberating for people. It is dangerous. And one other element, this is going too deep probably, but in psychoanalysis, most people are neurotic, right? Technically, you've got neurotic, you've got perverse, and you've got psychotic. Technically, broadly, there are three buckets, right? They're just useful buckets for people to work out how to do the process of psychoanalysis. And it takes years to actually diagnose. So everyone's going like, am I perverse, or am I psychotic, or am I neurotic? But it actually takes very hard to know. But the reason why they try to work it out a little bit is because if you're psychotic, if you're neurotic and you have like something happens and you hear a voice or thing, and then the psychoanalyst introduces doubt, gets you to question. The neurotic goes with that. They love going, X, Y, and Z and thinking things through. Psychotic is very dangerous. The psychotic, whenever you introduce doubt and unknowing into their worldview, it can cause a psychotic break. It can be very, very disturbing. So this is, and I apply this to churches. I think some churches have psychotic structures. Some churches have perverse structures, and some churches have neurotic structures. And depending on what structure I think is being exhibited, I think there's a slightly different way of going about how to do something. So there are people, whenever people make jokes about someone says, oh, if I wasn't a Christian, I would go out and I would like kill someone, or I would do something terrible. And then of course the joke is always, my goodness, so Christianity is the only thing that's preventing you from doing like crazy shit, right? That's terrible. And there's a legitimate joke to be made there, and you go like, hopefully you're just being good because you want to be good, not because Christianity demands it. But actually, there are people in the world. It's like if you're a psychotic, for example, and by the way, I've got lots of friends who are psychotic. The main thing about psychosis is just your ego's not very strong. So you have out-of-body experiences. You don't know where you start and where you stop. You sometimes hear voices. Fine, And but sometimes in psychosis, you also go like, you don't experience rules in the same way. You're the kid who's listening to the teacher shout and going, you're just a teacher. Everybody else is unconsciously thinking, that's my mum or that's my dad. I better be good. The teacher's like an authority figure. The psychotic's like, the teacher's just a person, right? Or the police officer's just a guy. Police officer pulls you over, the neurotic feels guilty, like they've done something, even if they've done nothing. And you're always like, oh my goodness, look, we get told off. The psychotic just sees a guy, 20-year-old in a uniform. So psychotics can get themselves in trouble sometimes because they don't. Lacan calls it the non-dupe d'air, because which in French sounds like the name of the father and all that. But the reason is he's saying that actually the psychotic knows the truth. The psychotic knows that the police officer is just a kid, right? Is in the neurotic doesn't know the truth. The neurotic's duped. But precisely because the neurotic's duped, the neurotic doesn't err. The neurotic doesn't err because the neurotic says, okay, I'll pay the fine. A psychotic finds it really hard to pay fines. It's like, why would I pay a fine? And then they find themselves in jail. Right? That's the non-duped error. They're kind of right, but it causes all sorts of problems. And I can't remember for the life of me why I'm telling you all of that. So there you go.
That's really good.
Yeah. But it's probably useful in some sort of way. Okay, it's 3:15, so I should let you go. We're going to continue to have a drink and have a conversation. I wish you were here, although I don't, because if you're all here, my gin selection would disappear very, very quickly. But I hope you got something out of this. Next week, we're going to be doing Catherine Sarah Moody's fantastic book. What's the name of it?
Radical theology.
Yeah, Radical Theology and Emerging Christianity, which, by the way, is as hard to get as Hessert, because it is actually $100. This is $100 because you can hardly find it. That's $100 because it's $100. But I have a little segment from it. There's actually a slight chance we won't be able to use it because, for a long story short, I contacted the publishers and they haven't quite got back to me to say that we can use it. I think we can because I'm giving it so much publicity and it's only a little segment, so we should be fine. If it suddenly disappears from my website, it's because they said you're not allowed to use it.
So download
it now. Exactly. Yes. And Catherine Sarah Moody's, I think one of the best commentators on my work at the moment and how my work relates to some philosophers and some theologians. So next week we're going to start getting into my form of religionist Christianity, which is very influenced by Hessert and by Tillich. So next week's going to be exciting. Keep talking to people on Facebook. If you live in areas, remember to tell people, I live in such and such, like Indiana. Anybody else want to get a drink? Do all of that stuff. And on the last week, I'm going to try and do something a bit more practical and talk about how the Omega course really should look. And encourage you to kind of do this kind of stuff where you live. So there you go. All in all, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Talk to you soon. And